In 1876, a cowboy riding fence line from the Panhandle to Dodge City carried 11 pounds of gear on his person at all times. Not a phone, not a wallet, not keys to anything. 11 pounds of tools that kept him alive in country that wanted him dead. The movies show you the gun. They never show you the other 10 items he would have died without in the first 48 hours. Half of what he carried would save your life today if you knew how to use it. The other half would get you arrested just for owning it. Here is what John Wayne never told you about what a man actually needed to survive 7 months between towns in 1880. These are the 15 things people really carried in the Old West. And number 8 is going to make you realize that everything you thought you knew about frontier survival came from a screenwriter who never spent a night outside Los Angeles. Because here is the truth. The West was not won by quick-draw artists in black hats squaring off at high noon. It was won by men who knew that a good knife mattered more than a fast gun, and by women who could start a fire in wind that would knock a horse sideways. It was won by people who understood that water was worth more than gold, and that the difference between dying of thirst and making it to the next creek was a piece of oilcloth folded in your saddlebag. Wyatt Earp spent more time looking for his canteen than he ever spent looking for his gun. Nobody put that in the movie. Number 15, Lucifer matches in a brass case. The sulfur match that could light in wind. Before 1830, starting a fire meant flint and steel and 10 minutes of your life you were never getting back. Then a British chemist mixed white phosphorus with sulfur and created a match that would ignite by friction on any rough surface. Americans called them Lucifers because they smelled like actual hell when they burned. A cowboy carried 20 of them in a waterproof brass tube that screwed shut and lived in his vest pocket. 10 cents for a tin of 100 matches in 1875. The brass case cost $1 and lasted 40 years. The smell hit you before the flame did. Rotten eggs mixed with burned hair. You turned your face away when you struck it, or you would taste sulfur for an hour. But it caught in wind that would blow out a candle from 6 feet away. And in country where the temperature dropped 40 degrees after sundown. A man who could start a fire in under 2 minutes stayed alive. A man who could not froze with his flint and steel in his hand, wondering what he did wrong. The brass case was everything. Paper matches turned to paste in a thunderstorm. Loose matches broke in your pocket and filled your vest with phosphorus dust that could ignite if you fell off your horse wrong. A waterproof brass tube meant your fire was waiting whenever you needed it. Cowboys checked that tube more often than they checked their ammunition. Fire was more important than bullets in country, where the nearest town was 4 days away, and 3 of those days were across open desert. Number 14. A clasp knife with a horn handle, not the Bowie knife Hollywood sold you. The working knife of the West was a folding clasp knife with a 3.5-inch blade, a handle made from deer, antler, or cow horn, and a brass bolster. You could buy one for $1 in 1870. A good one cost $3. It lived in your right front pocket. You used it 40 times a day, cutting rope, cutting leather, cutting food, digging splinters, opening cans. The blade held an edge if you stropped it on your belt every night. If you did not strop it, the edge went dull in a week. A man who kept his knife sharp was trusted. A man who let it go dull was watched. The knife told everyone around you whether you had your life under control. A dull knife meant dull judgment. And dull judgment got people killed. The Bowie knife you see in films was a fantasy designed for killing men in tavern fights, not for daily work. A cattleman carrying a Bowie was either looking for trouble or fresh off the train from Philadelphia. Number 13, a blue bandana, not for looking tough, for surviving. The cotton bandana was 22 inches square, dyed indigo blue, because indigo hid dirt better than any other color. It cost 15 cents in every dry goods store from St. Rives, Louis to Sacramento. A drover carried two, one around his neck, one in his back pocket, pulled up over your nose and mouth. It filtered dust on a cattle drive where 2,000 head kicked up enough dirt to turn noon into twilight, soaked in water and tied around your neck. It kept you cool, soaked in water and pressed to a wound. It slowed bleeding, wrapped around your hand. It let you grab a branding iron without losing skin. Women wore them as hair wraps on laundry day. Children wore them playing outlaw. The bandana in Hollywood is always red. The bandana in history is always blue. Indigo was cheaper, lasted longer, and did not show blood. Number 12, a canteen covered in wool felt. Water was worth more than gold, and everyone knew it. The standard canteen held 1 quart and was made of tin covered in gray wool, felt that you soaked in water before you rode out. Evaporation through the wet felt cooled the water inside by 10 degrees. In August, in West Texas, where the air temperature hit 110, that 10-degree difference mattered. The canteen cost $1.50 in 1877. You filled the canteen every time you crossed water. Every time, you topped it off because the next water might be 20 miles away or 50 miles away. And if you guessed wrong, you died while your horse watched. The water tasted like tin and wool. You got used to it. After a year, water that did not taste like tin seemed wrong. A full canteen weighed 3 pounds. You carried it on a leather strap over your shoulder. Women carried canteens on the same strap in the same position. Water was water. Number 11, a tobacco tin repurposed for emergency cash. The hiding place everyone used and everyone knew about. Prince Albert tobacco came in a flat tin with a friction lid that seated tight enough to keep water out. When the tobacco was gone, the tin became a vault. You put your emergency money inside. $5 in paper bills, folded twice. You carried it in your left rear pocket, and you never touched it unless you were dead broke in a town where you did not know anyone. Every drifter had one. Every cowboy had one. The tin in your back pocket was the thing between you and starvation. And a man who spent his Prince Albert money on whiskey was not trusted to handle serious work. He had proven he could not manage scarcity. Women kept the same tins in the same pocket for the same reason. Survival was not gendered. A woman alone in Abilene in 1875 with no money was in exactly the same danger as a man. Some people put a lock of hair in the tin instead of money. Hair from someone they loved who died before they made it west. The tin kept it safe. Nobody asked what was in your tin. First pattern break. If you are starting to realize the West was not the place you saw in Tombstone, hit subscribe right now. What is coming in the top 10 is going to completely change how you think about frontier survival. Number 10, a sewing kit in a Bull Durham sack, because nothing lasted and everything tore. A sack of Bull Durham tobacco came with a yellow drawstring pouch made of cotton twill. When the tobacco was gone, the sack became a sewing kit. 2 needles, 1 spool of black thread, 1 spool of brown thread, 4 buttons, and a 2-inch square of beeswax. Total cost, 25 cents in meal, wheat cents, satanta wheat. Buttons fell off, seams split, pockets ripped. You sewed them yourself or you went without, because the nearest tailor was in a town you had not seen in 6 weeks. A man who could sew a button back on was unremarkable. A man who could not was considered defective. The beeswax mattered more than anything else in the kit. Unwaxed thread pulled apart halfway through a repair. Waxed thread glided through denim and leather, and the repair held for months. Cowboys waxed their thread by running it across the beeswax 3 times before threading the needle. Women carried larger kits in wooden boxes with specialty needles. But every woman also carried the emergency kit in the Bull Durham sack, because fancy boxes stayed home and emergencies happened on the trail. Number 9. Hardtack in a tin. The food that would not die and tasted like it. Hardtack was flour, water, and salt baked into a cracker so hard you could break a tooth on it if you bit down wrong. It lasted 5 years without spoiling. It weighed nothing. It cost 2 cents per cracker. Every person traveling in the West carried at least 20 pieces in a tin that sealed tight. You did not eat hardtack unless you were out of everything else. It tasted like salted cardboard. The texture was somewhere between wood and ceramic. You soaked it in coffee for 5 minutes to soften it enough to chew, but it was food. 100 calories per cracker. Soldiers ate hardtack daily during the Civil War. They called it sheet iron and tooth dullers and worm castles because it often contained weevils. You learned to tap the hardtack against the table before you ate it. If weevils fell out, you brushed them off and ate the cracker anyway. Protein was protein. Cowboys carried hardtack as emergency rations. The tin stayed in the saddlebag until the day you needed it. That day always came. A horse went lame. A storm trapped you. You got separated from your crew. The hardtack tin was the thing between you and starvation. Number 8. A whetstone for sharpening, because a dull blade was a death sentence. The whetstone was a rectangle of Arkansas stone, 6 inches long and 2 inches wide, that lived in your bedroll wrapped in an oiled cloth. It cost Satanta 5 cents in meal wheat cents Satanta now. A good one lasted 20 years. You used it once a week. The stroke was always the same. Down the stone at a 20-degree angle. Lift. Return. Repeat. 30 strokes per side. The sound carried. The scrape of steel on stone was loud enough to wake people in the next camp. Nobody complained. Sharpening on Sunday morning was normal. A dull axe was more dangerous than a sharp one. It bounced off the wood instead of biting in. A sharp axe went exactly where you aimed it and stopped. Control came from sharpness, not strength. Women used the same whetstone for kitchen knives. A cook with a sharp knife worked twice as fast as a cook with a dull one. Second pattern break. Here is what they do not tell you in the movies. The gun was the least important tool a cowboy owned. He used his knife 50 times for every time he touched his revolver. The knife kept him fed. The gun kept him buried. Every man who lived long enough to retire knew the difference. Number 7. A small bottle of whiskey for snakebite. The cure that did not work, but everyone carried anyway. The universal belief in the West was that whiskey cured snakebite. You got bit. You drank whiskey. None of this was true. Whiskey made snakebite worse by increasing your heart rate and spreading the venom faster. But every cowboy carried a 2-ounce bottle specifically for snakebite. The bottle was small enough to fit in your hand and cork stopped to prevent spillage. It cost 20 cents to fill at any saloon. You never drank it for pleasure. That was emergency whiskey. Drinking your snakebite whiskey for fun meant you were the kind of person who stole from your future self. And nobody trusted a man like that. Actual snakebite treatment involved a knife, a rope, and a lot of pain. You cut an X over the bite, sucked out what venom you could, tied a rope above the bite to slow the spread, and rode hard for the nearest doctor. Most people survived if they got there within 6 hours. Most did not. The whiskey did nothing except make you drunk while you died. But it made you feel like you were doing something. And that feeling was worth 20 cents when doing nothing was unbearable. Number 6. A small Bible or prayer book. Faith in country that tested it daily. Most people in the West carried a Bible. Not a large family Bible, a pocket Bible, 5 inches tall and 3 inches wide. It cost $1 in 1885. It fit in your jacket pocket and traveled everywhere. You read it on Sunday if there was no church within riding distance. You read it at night when you could not sleep. You read it after someone died, which was often. The most common passages were Psalms, because Psalms understood suffering. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Every person in the territories knew what valley that was. The Bible doubled as a record book. Births, deaths, marriages were written on the blank pages. A family Bible passed down through 3 generations contained a complete genealogy. If the Bible was lost, the history was lost. Women carried Bibles in the same pocket for the same reasons. Faith was not divided by gender. God heard everyone the same. Or God heard no one. Either way, you kept the book close. Number 5, a harmonica, music in a place with none. The harmonica was small enough to fit in your shirt pocket. Cost $1. And could be played by someone who had never touched a musical instrument. You learned 3 songs: Home Sweet Home, Red River Valley, and something your mother used to sing. You played at night around the fire when the work was done and sleep was still an hour away. Nobody talked during harmonica music. You just listened and looked at the fire and thought about people you used to know. The sound carried for half a mile in the stillness, and sometimes another harmonica answered from another camp. A good harmonica player was valued, not for entertainment, for morale. Men working 16-hour days in heat that killed horses needed something to remind them they were still human. 3 minutes of music did that. Children learned harmonica before they learned to read. It was the first instrument. The only instrument, a broken harmonica, was not repairable. You threw it away and bought another one. Number 4, a loaded revolver you almost never fired. The gun everyone focuses on was the tool they used least. A Colt single-action Army revolver cost $17 in 1878. Ammunition cost 50 cents for a box of 50 rounds. A working cowboy fired his gun maybe twice a year. Once to put down a horse with a broken leg. Once to scare off a coyote. The gun sat in a holster on your hip every day and you forgot it was there. It was heavy and uncomfortable, but you wore it because everyone else wore one. And a man without a gun in Deadwood in 1876 was either a preacher or fresh off the stage from Boston. Cleaning the gun was a Sunday chore. You disassembled it, wiped down every part with an oiled rag, and put it back together. The process took 15 minutes. If you skipped it for a month, the gun stopped working. Most gunfights you have heard about did not happen. The shootout at high noon is a myth. Actual violence in the West was quick, close, and ugly. The idea of 2 men facing each other 20 paces apart was invented by dime novelists who had never been west of the Mississippi. The men who survived the West were the ones who avoided fights. They talked their way out. The men who looked for fights died young and were buried in graves nobody visited. Third pattern break. Here is what was actually lost when the frontier closed. The West was the last time in American history where a man could make a life with 11 pounds of tools. That door closed in 1890. What replaced it required a resume and a credit score and a permanent address. Number 3, a compass that you checked once and ignored forever because direction was obvious until it was not. A basic brass compass cost $2 in 1881. It was small enough to fit in your watch pocket, and it pointed north with reasonable accuracy. Most cowboys bought a compass, checked it once to confirm north, and never looked at it again. The sun rose in the east and set in the west. The compass was for the one day in 5 years when you got turned around in a blizzard. The cowboys who succeeded were the ones who learned to read land. They remembered landmarks. They tracked the sun. The compass was a backup to skills you should have developed anyway. Number 2, a leather sewing awl, the tool that kept everything else working. The sewing awl was a needle and thread built into a wooden handle with a mechanism that locked the stitch as you pulled it through. It was designed for repairing leather, saddles, belts, holsters, boots, straps, bags. It cost $3 in 1880. It lasted forever if you did not lose it. Most people lost it. Repairing leather with an awl took patience. A 6-inch tear took 30 minutes to fix properly. Every camp had one person who was good with the awl. That person repaired everyone's gear without being asked. A stirrup strap that broke on the trail could cripple you. A ripped saddlebag meant losing your gear. The awl fixed all of it. It was the tool that kept every other tool working. Number 1, the skill to use all of it. What mattered more than any object, you could carry every item on this list and still die in the first week if you did not know what you were doing. The brass match case was useless if you could not build a fire that would stay lit in wind. The canteen was useless if you did not know where to find water to fill it. The real divide in the West was not between rich and poor. It was between competent and incompetent. A rich man who could not start a fire froze to death. A poor man who knew how to read the land survived and eventually prospered. Those skills were taught by doing. You learned by watching people who knew what they were doing. The cowboys who made it understood that frontier life punished shortcuts instantly. A poorly tied knot let your horse loose. Staying alive in the West was not about being tough or being lucky. It was about being methodical. It was about doing small things correctly every single day until those small things became automatic. That mindset is gone. We live in a world where you can buy a replacement for anything that breaks. The 11 pounds of gear a cowboy carried would not save you today, because you do not have the 20 years of knowledge that made those tools useful. But those skills are not lost. They are just sleeping. You can learn to sharpen a knife. The tools are still available. The knowledge is still available. What is missing is the necessity. The movies never show you the sewing awl or the whetstone. They show you the gunfight. The reality was a man sitting by a fire at the end of a 14-hour day, stropping his knife and checking his canteen. It was a woman starting a cook fire in wind that kept blowing out her matches and getting it done. That is not a story Hollywood knows how to tell. But it is the story that mattered. Make something this week with your hands. Sharpen your kitchen knife. Learn to start a fire with one match in wind. Tell me in the comments which one you tried. Tell me if you know how to use any of these tools. Some of you are holding pieces of the actual West in your hands right now. And the stories attached to those pieces are worth more than anything I could write here.